1, 2, 3, 4. Check. Check.
All right. Hello, I would like to call to order the January 28th work session for bond scope discussion from the Pelham Board of Education. So please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, and then want to turn it over to Sid to tell us, we met for executive session?
Yep.
Did we already?
We met in executive session to discuss the proposed acquisition, sale, or lease of real property.
Thank you. And then, I've, you probably just noticed, we're a very short board. Jackie, who is the president of the board, unfortunately couldn't be here, so I'm going to be stepping in as the vice president on her behalf. We have Will, who is on the computer, so he will be able to vote and able to make comments. And we also have Anne Marie Garcia, who couldn't be with us today, but because we do have a quorum, we'll be able to vote today. So thank you, and thank you for those in the audience who have joined us. So I have a few words to say, opening remarks from Jackie, that I want to read to you on her behalf. As a board, we've been studying the facilities needs of the Pelham School District for over a year. We're reviewing building conditions, demographic study, and holding discussions at Board of Education and Facilities Committee meetings throughout the entire year. It is the board's responsibility to ensure our facilities are maintained for the long term. A key opportunity before us is the $65 million in debt coming off in the next couple of years. 10 of that million will be coming off in the 26-27 school year and 55 in the 30-31 school year. This would allow for us to fund a substantial portion of the next capital projects in a way that could become tax neutral for the community. All of our schools, except for the new Hutchinson Elementary School, require infrastructure upgrades to remain operational. Issues like broken furnaces, leaking roofs can force schools to close. We also need to consider adding air conditioner, at least to our elementary schools, to prevent the need for remote learning during the hot weather months. Finally, geothermal heating is an option for several schools and can likely save us some money in the long term. The proposed projects at the middle school and high school campus aims to address critical space needs. It will provide additional cafeteria and common space, more classrooms, state-of-the-art science lab. We may also have the opportunity to bring administration back into the campus, replacing the need to rent off-campus district office space. At Sawanoy, the beloved school and community space, we face the greatest need. The building lacks ADA compliance, has the smallest classrooms in the district, and doesn't have enough flexible spaces to accommodate the growing demand for additional sections and special services. The gym, cafeteria, and auditorium are all housed in one space, and I know they have a cute name for it, but it's still one space. There's a real opportunity to improve Sawanoy now, preserving the historic building while addressing these critical needs. We've had some feedback we received from the Sawanoy community, and generally it's very supportive. However, there are 3 concerns that we are taking very seriously. The historic building must be preserved. The outdoor space, even with an expansion, needs to be reimagined to support community engagement and resilience. Minimizing disruption to students in the surrounding neighborhood during the construction will be critical for us. We believe these concerns are manageable for the long-term benefit of Sawanoy students. It is important to note that any project we approve is several years out with no immediate budget impact today. The next few weeks are crucial in the future of Pelham Schools facilities. We will have a survey. We will have many opportunities for the community to engage. Please attend our information sessions. Please, reply to our surveys. Your feedback is vital as we move forward. Thank you. Those were the opening remarks
Great.
from
Thank
our
you.
president, who just couldn't be here today. Moving on to I'll take a motion to appoint a clerk pro tem, and that would be
Me?
Dr. Chen.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed, any abstentions? No? All right?
Great. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so with that, we'll get on to the business of the evening. So thank you all for being here tonight. We appreciate everyone's time. Obviously, we are a little bit short because this was one of the special meetings that we added in, recognizing that we wanted to meet a little more frequently to continue to see this process along. So tonight, we're very thankful to have our district architects back from KG&D. We have Russ Davidson and Walter Hauser, who we've been in communication with a lot over the last couple of weeks. As Natalie mentioned, we've already started with some community engagement events and got a lot of really important feedback from the Siwanoy community. And I want to reiterate, and I think in the presentation you will see, this is part of the process. We have to start somewhere. We all recognize the first iteration is not the last iteration by any stretch of the imagination. It's a place to start the conversation, get ideas out on the table, and then work those ideas into design. So my hope is I see a couple familiar faces here tonight who may have been with us last week at Siwanoy. We're hoping that the folks who were there see some of that feedback being implemented in this next round of designs. And again, this is not the last that we will see, but this is the next iteration because it is an iterative process. So I'm going to very quickly just turn it over to our guests tonight because we have a lot to look at, a lot of great updates from them, and then a lot for the board to consider tonight. And we also want to leave some time for public comment after we get through our presentation and discussion. So take it away.
Well, thanks for having us tonight. I also wanted to introduce Mike Vigliotti from our office.
Yes.
Mike has been doing a lot of work behind the scenes, helped with the building condition survey, and prepared most of the drawings you'll see tonight. So we do have a lot to cover tonight. We're going to move through it pretty quickly, but please interrupt if there are questions or we need to create a little space for discussion if anything pops up. So apologies if it feels like it's moving quickly. But what we really wanted to talk about tonight was just a little bit, take a step back and talk about the process of capital project planning, talk about what we've done to date, and then talk about the last couple of weeks since January 8th, what we've done as a group in planning the project and the collection of feedback and the response to that feedback. We're going to talk specifically about some of the concerns and questions that have come up as part of the process. We can see clearly that folks are hearing what we're talking about, thinking about the concepts, and we've been collecting feedback through various channels. And then we have some refined and updated concepts and budgets to go through. There are a few more options than we saw last time, so brace yourself. There's a lot of drawings. We'll go through them pretty quickly, and then we're going to talk a little bit about next steps. So when planning a capital project for a public school in New York State, there's a typical process that's undertaken. It really starts with the building condition survey. So that's the process of having a licensed architect and engineer go through your buildings, evaluate the condition, and prepare an assessment of what needs to be addressed in the next 5 years. And that's a process mandated by New York State Facilities Planning. We did that. So that happened last summer. We then evaluated your space adequacy. So that was in two forms. One, capacity evaluation side by side with your enrollment projections. So we're looking to make sure you have enough space to house the students that are in your district and will be in your district. But there's also an instructional space adequacy component to make sure you have the right kinds of spaces. And you may remember that conversation about the support spaces at the elementary schools and some of the science spaces at the high school. We take that information and the input from the district stakeholders and develop concepts. So we've done that. We presented them at the last meeting. We're now in this evaluation refinement mode. So we've responded to the input. We have some refinements to talk about tonight, and that certainly will continue over the course of the next couple months. And then that concept that's developed is something that can be put forth in the form of a referendum to the voters. And we're hoping that that may be as soon as May. That's something. Yeah.
So we know we did your last bond, and during that process, we showed you lots of detailed, beautiful renderings before the project was fully designed. if you'll recall, all of that came after the bond was approved. So the pre-bond process is really, as Walt said, it's concept and budget and an approach. Stop. So when you get into, is that really the size of that science room, or is the science room there, or the art room there? Most of that actually comes later. So what you're seeing here is the bar on the bottom that shows schematic design, design development, and construction documents. And you'll see this tiny little red line on the left. That's where we're going to get pre-bond. So most of the design happens after you approve the concept and the budget. We certainly want an approach, but this really should be about the big picture. Does the board and the community support this idea and the funding? And we will work with you on the design, and there will undoubtedly be changes and enhancements, as there was with the Hutch project. If you actually looked at the pre-bond work from Hutch and the finished building, they resemble each other, sort of. But it was on budget, and it met the initial concept. Yeah, so post-bond, that design is going to take some time, about a year. And then there's going to be permitting, and then bidding, and then construction. So as Walt said, this is a long-term process. There's going to be many more opportunities for input, just as there was with the last bond. We had many community buildings after the bond passed to talk about how it was going to be built, how it impacted the community, and how it's going to be done safely.
So our job is going to help guide you in terms of what questions we should be asking now and what questions will fall into that schematic design and detailed design phase that will take many months after a potential referendum. So as we mentioned, we've been busy at work since the meeting on the 8th. We had a facilities committee meeting where we talked about the concepts that were presented and some initial feedback. We've gathered feedback from multiple channels, kind of been pouring in. We've looked at the overlap between some of the distinct categories of work we talked about last time in terms of infrastructure, air conditioning, additions and alterations. And the numbers you'll see tonight are considerate of multiple components being selected. So we've kind of taken out the overlap of where those pieces meet. And then, of course, refine the conceptual designs primarily for Siwanoy and Memorial High School, middle school concept, and, of course, update the budgets. So I just want to go through the feedback we received a little bit, specifically by category of work. So we'll just start with the infrastructure component. As I mentioned, we've addressed the cost-saving overlap if, for instance, the big one is hydronic heating and air conditioning. So the piping that would be used for hydronic heating could also serve to provide the cooling throughout the building. So if both of those are taken or executed, hydronic heating and air conditioning, there's a pretty significant savings relative to the two independent costs we talked about at the last meeting. So we're going to go into that detail a little bit later in the presentation. One question was, is there any way to air condition the high school for less money? So we did take a look at that. There are some options, and I think we found a reduced cost alternative there. Can we provide geothermal at this building in the middle school? The short answer is no. The systems that are here are not really conducive to just adding a geothermal system. It would require a redo of many of the components in here, and there's a lot of expected useful life. So I think at this time, it really doesn't make sense. It would be at a point where we are with some of the elementary schools where we're potentially changing out the whole system. We're going to talk a little bit about geothermal and the financing around that. How long does it take for a quote-unquote payback? Payback's a tricky term, but we have some information to share on that. And then, of course, the investment tax credit funding, federal funding, that is in the form of a rebate that you would see after the completion of the project. We have a very rough estimate of what that could be. Okay, that was infrastructure. So Siwanoy. We received a lot of good feedback on Siwanoy. I would say one of the things that stood out to us we heard over and over again is that the site at Siwanoy is really important to the neighborhood. The building is as well, but I think we didn't understand the importance of the green space, the play space, and the outdoor features on that site and in the context of the feedback that we got. So you'll see some improvements on the concepts that respond to that. At the same time, we heard parking, it was not a desirable best use of that facility, so we've limited any vehicular access to the site to a very minimal service area for any cafeteria services. And then the architecture of the building resonates with a lot of people, particularly in the neighborhood. And we need to be cognizant, no matter what happens at that building, to protect and enhance the architecture there. So whether it's a larger addition with some removals or a smaller addition to the building, that addition will be respectful to the historic architecture of Simonway Elementary School. So in the concept of the site improvements, storm drainage, we heard over and over again, is a concern. In Pelham, we know that it's a concern kind of nationally. We know it's a concern in this area with flash flooding. We have very significant rain events now. So any improvement we make to that campus will include significant stormwater improvements. We did hear a comment that the cafeteria should accommodate 3 grades, not 2. And that the concepts for option C in particular should identify all of the necessary program space. I think in our last presentation, we did not include some labeling of the library and music spaces at the high school. So we talked about this a little bit on the 8th, but the space that was labeled as a cafeteria really should be considered something more akin to a commons with broader uses throughout the day and higher degree of flexibility and less emphasis on food service. So there would be grab and go, but not a dedicated kitchen space in that addition. The proposed main entry at the annex probably is not of high importance with some of the feedback, and the loading dock is. So that has been taken out of the plans. There's been a lot of discussion about the annex and how a renovation of the annex would happen, how it would impact the high school and middle school student flow. I don't know that we've landed on a consensus around what could or should happen in the annex. We have some options of how to renovate it, but we heard very strongly from different folks within the buildings that both the second and the third floor have significant roles in how the school works and how students flow in and out of the building or through the building. We did have a very detailed discussion about science lab needs. I should say not detailed, comprehensive discussion about how many spaces are required. And at a minimum, we believe the science department needs a net gain of 2 labs. 4 would be preferable. And there's even a request to put all of the science labs, 12, in the addition. So we've explored that option as well. And additionally, there was a request for a physical education space outside the middle school gym that would attach to this addition. So we're going to show you an option for that as well. So numbers are forthcoming. Just wanted to remind everybody what goes into the project estimate. So this is when you see a number, it's encompassing all of the costs that would go into that aspect of the project. So direct construction costs, contingencies, escalation where we're trying to cast to the future cost of something, and then the project costs, so the non-brick and mortar costs. So every number is what we would call fully baked. There are no adders to that. So this is the infrastructure that we've talked about. There are no changes to the infrastructure. So this is the roofing, windows, masonry, heating plant replacements, and upgrade to hydronic heat. So that's the same scope of work we talked about last time with the same number of $54.275 million. As I mentioned, we did take a hard look at the air conditioning and considered how the air conditioning would work with an upgrade to hydronic heat. So these numbers are down significantly from the last time you saw them. I think we were closer to 40 million. We're now talking about 29.9 million. This assumes that the hydronic heat upgrades happen at the buildings, so we can take advantage of utilizing those pipes. But good news is significantly down. Geothermal, yeah.
Can I ask, the high school is very reduced from the last time.
Yes. Yeah, a lot of the work in the high school is actually getting the cooling to different places and distributing it. So taking advantage of this piping and limiting The previous proposal was using remote VRF units, which require separate power distribution or power sources. So there was an electrical distribution component, a cooling distribution component, and that piping took the place of a lot of that disruptive work. So, ground source heat pump costs we are estimating are a little bit higher. There's no change in the proposed systems, but we did take some bid results between January 8th and today, and the numbers we were seeing for the wells were about $30,000 a well, as opposed to what we were estimating of $25,000 a well. So we just changed the unit cost per well, and that did increase. It did result in a slight increase for geothermal costs, but that's just our best understanding of the current costs. So ground source heat pump payback is complicated. There's a lot to this. And every single project is individual. So there's no rule of thumb generally. But we were able to find some resources through NYSERDA for other studies, or another study that's very close by for the Children's Village. And that study looked at the cost of a geothermal system compared to what's called baseline or a standard system over 25-year life cycles. And they looked at it two ways. So this is the first chart. And it compares operating costs, utility spends, initial capital investment, and maintenance costs over that 25-year period, projected costs. And without incentive funding or considering carbon offset costs, it's about 10% more over the course of the first 25 years for geothermal. The study does note that the second life cycle of equipment is where you get the major savings, because you don't have that capital reinvestment. And now you're operating at a much lower utility cost. So that's the first model. The second model assumes incentive funding and also quantifies the social impact of carbon offset. So with both of those components listed here, the geothermal system has an 85% savings. But I think it's quantifying the carbon offset probably isn't necessarily applicable here, but with incentive funding, it's 10% lower over the first 25-year life cycle cost to operate the geothermal. So we could anticipate in the first life cycle cost of 25 years that it will save you money, and the second life cycle cost, where the geothermal well field will remain and the equipment in the building will be replaced, you'll see significant savings. I hope that helps a little bit. What I really want everybody to understand is this is not a system that will pay for itself in 8 years as a standalone proposition, but will pay long-term dividends to the community. It'll be a generational investment that will save substantial money over a 50-year period, which is the anticipated life cycle of the wells.
And the wells typically last longer than 2 cycles, right? Wasn't that?
I'm not aware of a system that is older than 50 years.
Well, I guess expected.
Yeah, we don't know
expected
yet.
life.
I don't know yet, they're still working.
Yeah, in theory, they should.
Yeah.
It's a heavy-duty plastic pipe that's welded. It's not exposed to UV. It shouldn't degrade, and it's cemented in place. So,
Can I, well, just
Yeah.
before you go into this, I meant to mention earlier, and just for later on in the meeting after the presentation, the board will be asked to adopt a resolution declaring us as lead agency for the SECRA process. And I'll ask Walter and Russ to talk a little about SECRA when it seems appropriate in the presentation. What I wanted to say on the front end is in order to meet some milestone timelines, if we are aiming to get towards a May vote, we are asking you to approve this tonight because there's certain timelines that we have to meet. But that being the case, given that we are still considering various options for Siwanoy and various options for the high school and have not narrowed down any scope, we had to write that resolution with the largest possible scope. So what's in here is not a predetermined decision. I want to make that crystal clear to the board and crystal clear to the community. It's here because we have to include it on the front end to make sure that we do all of our due diligence from the environmental review perspective. So I just wanted folks to know that this is really the most inclusive of everything that we're going to see tonight, but we're by no means going to do everything at the scale that we're seeing tonight. So I just wanted to, as you went through, I wanted to assure the board of that. So, thank you.
Yeah, we can talk a little bit more about the secret process towards the end, but it's a required process. Most of the work we're talking about here is actually would fall into a category where a review is administrative at most, but we have some additions that are above the threshold. We'll talk about that at the end. So Simon Elementary School, you may remember at our last discussion, we really narrowed it down to two options. One was put an addition off the back of the building that provides a net gain in classroom space for the building while allowing the kindergarten to come up out of the lowest floor. And then option C is to take down the two wings and build a larger addition on the plan right side of the building. And we've looked at those with two variations tonight. So we're going to show you two versions of option B. There's a B, and we've deemed a B minus because we have an option where we don't build a cafeteria in that addition, but still get the net gain in classrooms and still renovate the existing building. And then option C, we've got two versions, one where the gym is in the front and one where the gym is in the back. So we want to talk a little bit about the history of Simanoy briefly.
So Walt spent some time on the internet and found the original architect. I've been studying their drawings, which are elegant. But the bottom line is here is we share everyone's view that this is an important, iconic building in the neighborhood. And that whatever happens to it in the way of renovation or addition has to keep it that way. So, we've done this with Prospect Hill. If any of you have seen our work at Pleasantville High School, we put two additions on there that most people think have been there since 1929. So we know how to do that. Not everything new needs to look contemporary, but we think we can make it work. And the original architect was pretty well known, as was the architect for Prospect Hill. So you've had some really good original architects on your projects. And York and Sawyer have been around for a while and done some pretty important buildings across the country.
So this is an image of the existing site plan at Simanoy. We've colorized the building yellow. You'll see that in all of our options. But there are a couple of important features we wanted to point out and talk about. Of course, the microforest and the outdoor classroom have been talked about a lot in the last few weeks, and the importance of maintaining those facilities and their importance to the site and the neighborhood at large. We have incorporated the relocation of the playground on the upper right to all of the concept plans. And one of the things I'd like to just point out is in the aerial view, it becomes pretty apparent that the rear of the building has a fair amount of impervious surface, so asphalt, which is not a great solution in stormwater management. So we do want to talk about that a little bit, ways to soften the site and continue to enhance the landscape and storm drainage management for the site. So this is the site plan for option B. We have a single site plan for both the option B and B minus where we don't have a cafeteria. The concept is the same, but we would enhance the play area behind the building. We're proposing introducing a greenway between the play area and the road, so additional landscape and screening. I think we did hear a request to replace the fence. We will definitely replace the fence. But we're relocating the playground. You can see let's see if this pointer works, in the upper right. There is a very small access drive to get to the end of the building to service the cafeteria. So we would need that to take garbage in and out and get deliveries to the cafeteria space. And of course, we are maintaining, in this scenario, the outdoor classroom on the left side of the plan. And we're proposing two improvements on the right side. One is an outdoor play area for the kindergarten classrooms only, which you'll see are on the ground floor in the new addition. They're up out of the main building. And some soft enhancements adjacent to the microforest on the lower right side of the site plan. And that the vision there is that could be a meeting space for a class, or at least a place for a class to gather while visiting the microforest and engaging with some of those features on the site.
And Walter, can I just add, I know that the board may know this, but just to remind you, with the Hutchinson building, we did build, and I know Dr. Fitzgerald knows this very well, we built a kindergarten playground directly adjacent to the classrooms there. And the beautiful part of that is there was direct access from the classroom right out to the playground. so that we could continue to encourage play and keep it very close in proximity. So that this contemplates adding that as a third play space, basically,
Yes.
as
Yeah.
well as that additional soft gathering space that you mentioned.
Yes.
Catherine?
Do you have the calculations of the current hardscape versus greenscape, and then what each additional, what each change or proposed change would be, or proposed, sorry, words are hard, what each option would be afterwards versus like what's there now?
Not yet. Not yet.
Okay.
But what I would
You
point
don't have
out
to feel
is,
bad about that.
Yeah. So what I would point out is just putting the building aside, when we look at the kind of what the site looks like right now and what it could be, we see some opportunity to reduce the amount of pervious surface. So even behind the building where we have a playscape, that could
Impervious.
I'm sorry, reduce impervious. The surface behind the building could be a pervious surface. Doesn't have to be a standard asphalt. We can make that drainable.
But
Yeah,
that's in your plans to be able to have those numbers for us, or like that's something that you're working on?
The quantifying of the hardscape versus grass.
I think it's just the general.
We'll give you a
current-
calculation
Right, like
on
what
play area
percentage-
before and after.
Or
Yes.
well, like the total percentage of impervious surface versus like current versus what it would be in each option.
Right,
Am
well,
I-
there's two
am I
things
asking
there.
that
One is
clearly?
pervious, impervious, and I actually think we're gonna have more impervious when we're done, because the way it's designed. But the real thing is the functional play area, and how does that change? But I think what's happened over time is you've just paved that incrementally, because it's easier to take care of. But there's a lot of other options now, some of which you have at Hutch, with soft play surfaces and pervious pavements that you can play on. So we'll get you those calculations.
I realize this is conceptual. What are the things on the blacktop supposed to be? The orange and the...
Yeah, good question. Those are just markings for play. So foursquare, there's
Basketball.
I
there's-
think the orange
yeah, there's
rectangles
like
are
a basketball.
Oh, okay. I see.
Key marked there.
Yep.
So yeah, just
Got it.
surface markings for play.
Got it.
Yeah. Okay, so as we move into the building, purple is renovated space, so you can see in this is a plan of the first floor. We're maintaining the existing footprint in its entirety, and the blue part is an addition. The addition on the first floor would have a cafeteria that is adjacent to the outdoor play area, and 3 kindergarten rooms. So the outdoor play area for the kindergarten area would be off to the right. And then there's an elevator in the addition where the gym and cafeteriatorium is in the existing building that would give us access to the primary levels, and then a lift on the left side of the plan. So that takes care of the ADA accessibility. On the upper floor, we have 3 new classrooms. So that's a total add of 6 classrooms in the addition, but that allows us to get kindergarten out of the lowest level into the addition, and we can take over those kindergarten spaces to be right-sized music and art spaces. So they would have an increased footprint in the basement, and we end up with a net gain of 4 classrooms in the building. I'm sorry, a net gain of 2 classrooms because we lose 2 classrooms for the elevators.
But, hi, folks. Cool, you can hear me?
Will?
Great.
Yes, go ahead, Will.
Thank you. Walter, when you said that we could free up those basement kindergarten classrooms for music and art, per Dr. Champ's comment at the beginning, or no, maybe it wasn't Dr. Champ, maybe it was your comment at the beginning, the actual usage of that space is still, there'll be a lot of discussion around that. So it could be instructional support, it could be whatever we wanted it to be, not just specifically music and art.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things, Walter's going to be coming to the faculty meeting with me at Siwanoy next week, so we can hear directly from the staff, their thoughts on the needs of the building, and we're going to tour the building as well. These were some thoughts kind of that we had, given our art and music rooms in that building are currently in smaller spaces. And this would give us the ability to upgrade them space-wise. If we're moving kindergarten out into new, up to current standard rooms, it frees up those spaces. So it would be an opportunity to consider that, but we most certainly could consider more small group space. I think the current design renovation of B also adds some small group space as well. And I had asked them to label more, so maybe you can specifically kind of point out some of the program pieces that are now reflected.
It's also good to locate classrooms where students are in there only for one period, rather than being there all day. So the young students where they're all day should have the premium space. So music and art is a good initial concept.
Yeah, so part of the feedback we got in terms of labeling and making sure we've accounted for all the spaces is to make sure we've identified where art and music will be, OTPT, speech, reading, resource, and then 2 special ed 812 classrooms, as well as the library. So the library doesn't change in this configuration, but one possibility is to add a maker space in what is currently the art room if we relocate art. So we do get a net gain of instructional spaces on the lower level as well. So option B minus, as we're calling it, is exactly the same plan, except we're not introducing a new cafeteria. It's just the 6 classroom addition. There's a space reserved for expansion, which could be a cafeteria, could be classrooms, could be anything that's deemed necessary in the future. But the configuration of the building, except for the cafeteria, is exactly the same.
And
So-
we asked them to show that really as a response to some of the feedback from Simonoi and concerns about loss of green space. To say this is an option, and we wanted to just present the board with that to consider that.
Yeah, so it's between option B, where we get a net gain in instructional spaces and a cafeteria, and if you remember option A, where it was just about creating enough space to create accessibility. So this is an in-betweener. So option C is, the concept is take down the 2 side wings and build a larger new addition. And we've got 2 configurations, gym in the front, gym in the back. But the site plan is fairly similar to what we saw in option B in terms of the features around the building, except one notable difference, and that is we have a much larger play area on the left side of the building, adjacent to the outdoor classroom, in the footprint of the what is currently the wing. So we have expanded play area behind and adjacent to the building. There remains a kindergarten playground to the right side of the addition, and the microforest with outdoor learning space on the lower right corner of the plan. And again, we have a limited entry drive in the upper right corner of the site plan, which would only be for service of goods and services in and out of the cafeteria, essentially. So this is the floor plan. You'll see the purple is the center historic original component of the building, and on the right side, a much larger addition. So in this concept, the cafeteria faces the play area, just like we saw in option B. The gym, a new gym is presented all the way at the top of the plan, and then our 3 kindergarten classrooms on the right side of the new corridor, and a new library space in the front of the building. One of the features of this approach is that we could create a new main entry between the library space on the bottom right and the original center portion of the building. So that would be a new secure vestibule, a new potentially security station, and main office space right when you walk in.
And Walter, would that be, and that would be an accessible, and the new entrance, would that be accessible?
Yeah, it's still tricky, but our goal is to introduce a ramp there to get somebody up into that entrance space.
As opposed to making the back entrance the primary?
Correct.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And on the upper floor, we have a series of classrooms. So it's 2, 4, 6, 7 classrooms. On the top of the page is the upper part of the gym, so kind of like we see here on the second story or in Hutch, where you can look down into the gym. That's not an occupiable space on the second floor. And again, we have all of the spaces: OTPT, speech, reading resources, 2 special ed spaces, and our art and music would be, as we presented in the previous option. They could be located wherever in the building, but there are 2 spaces in the lower level that we recapture where kindergarten vacates. So the variant for option
Just
C,
I have a quick question, just
Yeah.
as far as the classroom space. For option B, there were 6 additional from the addition, and I understand the addition is the whole addition, but what's the equivalent for option C as far as additional classrooms?
Good question. And actually, B was a gain of 4. It was 6 in the
4.
expansion, but the gain is 4.
4, okay.
Right. So then to
So,
your other question.
the gain in option B is actually 2 net gain because we lose 2 interior
Oh,
classrooms for
right,
the
right, I'm
elevator.
sorry. Yep, I was confusing it with the other,
Yeah.
another option. Okay.
Yeah, one for the left, yeah.
So, yeah,
how
so
many
how does that,
gains?
how does that
What's the
compare
equivalent
with
for
C?
C?
Yeah, I think the net gain in C is actually 4 classrooms. And the idea here is let's maximize this addition. This is kind of our one shot at doing a big move of this nature. So we're adding additional space in this addition. So it's not quite apples to apples, but in this approach, we're kind of maximizing what can be done in that location.
And that's 4 full classrooms plus a bunch of support space,
Yes, there's a
right?
lot of support space available in this
Yeah.
addition. Yeah.
And both options did have 2 special education 812 classes, is that correct?
Yeah, so both B options have 812. Every option has 2
That's what I was asking. Yep, just
812s,
verifying.
yes.
Yes, thank you.
So this variant brings the gym to the front. We did hear,
Quick question, if I may. I'm sorry. Sorry, Walter, to interrupt.
no, it's okay. Your voice comes from a different place than your face, so it's hard to.
Oh, okay. Disembodied voice.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are many sort of pluses to this plan. There are minuses to option C as well. One of the minuses is if you are one of those people, and I completely respect their opinion, who feel strongly about the architecture, you lose the 2 wings, right? The old wings. However, for the folks who, and again, totally legitimate concern, and I acknowledge it, who are very concerned about green space, do you have a kind of rough sense of the net? Like, should this be sort of roughly net neutral in terms of green space? Because while you lose some for the new addition, you recover some from one of the wings, which is being lost, one of the old wings.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking about the question of green space. So there's definitely probably a slight reduction in outdoor space, right? Because our total, I think, footprint of the building goes up a little bit. And certainly we're proposing a larger playground area in the location of the left wing. So I think we'd like to think about it in terms of outdoor space and maybe a subcategory of green space. I would say the kind of net green space is probably fairly equivalent, or outdoor space, but we have a little bit more improvement on the site in terms of the playground and outdoor play area in this option and the building.
It's a little hard to think about the space. I'm thinking about the playground on the left-hand side that you guys added, the larger one,
Yeah.
to sort of visualize how big that is, because it's a building now. Is that like the size of a elementary school field? Like, is it like half of a soccer field? Like, what are we, a quarter of a soccer field? What are we talking about?
Much smaller than a soccer field.
But
Yeah,
much smaller than a quarter of a soccer field? I'm just trying to get a sense of
I think so.
scale.
Yeah, it's about the size of a basketball court.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not quite the same proportion, but
Yeah.
yeah. Yep.
But if we decide the playground is too big and we want to convert it to green space, we want more plantings and stuff, we could certainly do that.
Absolutely. This is just about possibilities. So all of this can be refined, but yes, the short answer is yes. So it sounds like you need to put together some quantification of kind of building footprint, impervious surface, pervious surface, play area, green space for these options. Yeah.
Yeah, current, like what we have now, and then what's attached to each of these options.
Yeah.
And then I have another question about, so the back entrance off of Manor Lane, all the way on the upper right, We see that little access path, and it was a different size on option B. But would the folks who enter from Manor Lane, like basically everyone who attends Simonoi who's on that side, so like coming from Esplanade in, would they in these options, I'm not seeing where it indicates the front entrance is in this drawing.
It's still in the.
It's
Yeah,
still in
the
the
front
front, so they
entrance-
would be able to walk like down the side in order to get to the front main entrance?
There's probably still there's back entrances now. There's both front and back end. There's one front entrance, main entrance, then there's
The
several back entrances.
But are we going down to, for security reasons, to one?
Yeah, once school starts, we always function in a single point of access, which I think in this would remain that front entrance, and even in C, the way that it's been reconfigured, I think that would remain the front as well, even though there's secondary and tertiary doors for staff.
So right now, folks come down from Esplanade, past the playground, right side playground, and around the building to the front. Is that what happens?
Yeah, along that walkway.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
Okay. Well, we can look at that. We haven't spelled out exactly what that traffic would, how one would traverse the site, but we could look at that. I don't think that would be an issue to have a walkway through there. Okay, so when we look at the plan for the C1 variant with the gym in the front, we can still create that new main entrance. And you'll notice the gym is pushed to the right a little bit, and that's really to respect the historic front loop and front facade of the building. If it were in line with the main volume of the addition, it would really kind of protrude out into the driveway. So we've stepped it to the right a little bit. So it does extend a little bit farther towards the property line than the building does right now. It's a little bit hard to see, but there's a dashed line that runs through the front right corner of the blue there, and that's the existing footprint. So, but that does create a little more space for a main entrance between the purple existing building and the blue in the new addition. So that could, again, house a main office space and a security vestibule. Gym on the front right could be open in a community fashion, just like Hutch, where we can kind of cordon off the rest of the building. It could be open in the evenings without, while securing all the other spaces. This option then has the cafeteria all the way up on the top of the plan, adjacent to the playground. 3 kindergarten classrooms on the first floor. 5 classrooms upstairs with a library and makerspace above the cafeteria. And then all of the other spaces we talked about, OTPT, speech, reading resource, 2 812 classrooms, and similar strategy on the lower level to house music and art. And again, that's subject to change, that those rooms can be relabeled and shifted around, but that provides the same net gain as option C in the class spaces. The only variation there is that we've divided the library into 2 spaces, a makerspace and a library. We could do that in option C as well. We have the footprint to do it. We just thought in this scenario, it lended itself in the plan to show that option.
What's the big difference of C and C? So what's the value? What was the C1? Can you just-
The gym location. Is
Yeah,
big
The
difference.
location?
Just the location of the gym. We did hear a comment from after the previous meeting that there was some concern about the volume of the gym in the back of the building and how it would interact with the neighborhood. So
Got it. Okay.
yeah,
That
we wanted to
makes
look at the idea of putting it in the front.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, just not familiar with the space, the parking. Is there any impact to parking from any of these versions that change sort of the parking
The biggest
situation?
thing is the original drafts had parking on site. We basically took that out.
That's what I'm saying. So
Yeah.
from the now to that, like, it's not like there's parking that's been
No, there's no
removed in the now. It's
No,
just,
there's no
it's just,
parking
there's not put it in. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And just another question about the gym. Is it currently still the same size as the Hutchinson one in this drawings?
The gym, that's a really good question. The gym in these drawings is half the size of Hutchinson. Hutch has
Okay.
the kind of
So
double
we've
court.
downsized from the original concept. That's okay.
Yep.
Yep, I think that's probably a wise
Yeah.
thing from a neighborhood perspective.
Yeah, you may remember early on, Russ presented a sketch where we had the outline of Hutch on the site, and it kind of enveloped the whole site. It just, the
Yes.
sense of scale that makes more sense to have that half size, or it's still a basketball court, but it's half of what's in Hutch.
Okay. Can you run a regulation basketball game in it, or do you need the double?
It's not going to be a high school game, no.
Okay, but it could be
A youth game.
youth games?
Yeah.
Okay.
How about the cafeteria? If it's remaining similar size to what it is today, or similar to Hutch, or?
I think similar in square footage to Hutch. A little bit bigger. It depends on the option. The variations, they change in square foot a little bit depending on the plan configuration, but we did here, we want to get 3 classes in there, not 2. So a little bit, I think the square footage in most of the options are slightly larger than Hutch.
Okay.
Okay. This is the less exciting part. We have some numbers. So you may remember option B last time we were here was a little bit less than 29.9. That's the updated cost. And really the change there is we've dedicated more work and dollars in the estimate to site improvements. We heard that that's a really important part of this project. So you saw we've included more investment in the site in terms of the plan, and we've dedicated more dollars in the estimate to that. So that's the delta between what we saw last time and where we are now. And that would include enhanced features like pervious pavement and also stormwater management. So that would be an enhanced stormwater management system. Option B is slightly less. You remember that is without the cafeteria. So everything else in that option is the same except for the square footage of the cafeteria. So we go from 29.9 to 28.25 million. And then option C and C1 are significantly more money, and that's really a function of additional square footage. So we have a lot more square footage in those options. They are larger than the last time we were here because we've encompassed more program space. So we now have everything covered in terms of the function of spaces accounted for in the building, which resulted in slightly larger building options. So we're basically 28.25 to $40 million within these options. Any questions on numbers? Okay. Ready to talk about the high school?
One quick question. I know you did some refining of air conditioning costs. Yep, you did. I know you did some refining of air conditioning costs. Did the Siwanoy revision on air conditioning costs take into account options B or variations of these?
Actually, the savings is resulted in the estimates associated with each one of the additions. So the air conditioning costs as presented are for the existing buildings without any additions or alterations. The proposed options that we just saw here account for net savings, reducing some of the buildings. So, right, but we don't need to air condition the wings that go away. So that net savings
Right.
is reflected in the estimate.
Okay, but like for an option B, one of the option Bs?
Yeah, there's really no impact on the air conditioning cost in option B because we're not reducing any square
okay.
footage of the building.
Right,
Yeah,
and
it's
you're-
really in the option C.
Got it.
Yep.
Got it.
Okay, high school.
But not to belabor that, but my recollection was option C with air conditioning and option B with air conditioning were, these numbers are a little different than the ones before, but maybe it's $1 million difference or $2 million difference to move to the larger building. Is that about right?
So, yeah, there were some intermediate estimates based on the infrastructure only that in concept with the previous footprint of option C narrowed the delta between option B and C. But with the added program for C, that kind of widened the gap again. But yeah, is that your question?
Well, so I forget what the estimate was for air conditioning for Siwanoy without any renovations.
has that.
It was like $6 or $7 million. Is that order of magnitude, right?
Yeah, that's order of magnitude, correct.
And so, 29.9 plus 7 million is, call it 37 million. And option C would have something substantially less than $6 or $7 million of incremental cost for air conditioning, right? Because you'd only be air conditioning, the main building would be the only addition?
Yeah, on a gross square foot basis, the center portion of the building is about 60% of the building.
Okay.
So if we were to kind of prorate the air conditioning cost, and that savings is captured in the estimate for option C. So the $40 million is inclusive of that net savings.
So the $40 million includes air conditioning the old space?
No, it includes
Okay.
the delta savings of the infrastructure work.
Okay.
So we've said if you do this addition, there's a reduction in some of the infrastructure work. Yeah.
So if we do
Okay.
B, we still have to add in all the infrastructure. Do we, like some of the infrastructure that we have to do? Oh, sorry. If we do B, we would still have to add back
Yes,
in some of that
yes,
infrastructure
yes.
work.
Yes, and option, so let's talk about the windows, for instance. So option C, option B, we're replacing all the windows in the existing building. That infrastructure is in the project, and you have to pay for the addition and renovation. So those are additive features. In option C, where we're taking down 2 wings, the cost for option C has a net reduction in the infrastructure cost. It's baked into the number we gave you. So the $40 million includes a savings from the $54 million of infrastructure costs. Those 2 numbers can be added together and you get a full scope of work. There's no additional savings there. Make sense? We're trying to eliminate the overlap. So
Yeah.
we're talking now about additive processes instead of let's pick and choose and let's see where the overlap lies. The overlap has been taken out.
So maybe the question is, and maybe you have this coming up in a different slide, what the cost would be for Simonoy additions plus air conditioning?
Yeah, we have that.
Okay, great.
And also just from the last conversation, from option C to option B, we talk about, right, that the delta sort of evened out where the costs were the same. Can you just top line I think it turned out to be $8 or $9 million from that version to this version. I know there were some variations. Like, what were the specific things that raised those costs from option C from last time to this time?
Yeah, so it's a complicated question. I think there was an intermediate bit of information about the infrastructure costs relative to the 2 options. What changed from that discussion was the size of option C increase. So the difference in cost now is related to total square footage, not the infrastructure work. So the infrastructure work is, even with the infrastructure overlap accounted for and the savings accounted for, there's still a pretty sizable delta between the work of option B and option C. I mean, intuitively, option B is a relatively small square footprint of addition, right? When we look at it on the site plan, it's relative to the existing building is pretty small, right? It's a sizable addition, but option C is a major intervention, and this is a lot more square footage than new construction.
And it got bigger.
Yeah, and it got bigger.
Yeah, so the option C that we're talking about now is different than the option C we talked about before because there's a bunch more support
There's more
staff,
space
support
added to
space.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yes.
One question on Simonoy before we move on. Recognizing, so I'm going to ask you this question, recognizing that we do not have one solid plan, we have a few, so if possible, perhaps this is more of like in theory, but no matter what option we pick, or I guess if we go with one of these additions, I'm thinking about the construction and the outdoor space, and knowing that the community, the Simonoy community, or just the Pelham community in general, uses this outdoor space pretty much like all the time. It's a great communal space. So is there a way, or in past projects, like how have you phased construction? And again, I recognize that we don't have a solid plan, so I'm asking you to answer a question without like having details, so I understand that this might be challenged. But like, how in theory do you phase construction when we're doing a project of this scope so that we're not completely taking out all of the outdoor space at one time, so the community still has this place to go and for kids to play at or meet up in?
So remember that phase where there was a little tiny red line on the left? That's something that would be figured out much later. But the bottom line is you need space to construct things. And actually, what we found out is the faster it all happens, the happier the community is. So if you break it down into 2 or 3 phases, to slow the construction, to maintain a little more outdoor space, I think you're actually going to work against neighborhood satisfaction, which is, it'll be done safely, it'll be done separately. We hear you, you want to try and preserve outdoor space for the community. We'll do the best we can with that, but we can't answer that in detail at this point.
Okay.
But multiple phases generally takes longer, which generally makes the community less happy than getting it over quickly.
So then,
I think the reality is during construction, particularly for option C, we're gonna have to take over some of the site to do that, and which is what was done at Hutch, right?
right.
We did that. We took over some of the site for the duration of the construction. It was turned back over in phases as the building completed. So this is not a huge site, and the phasing and logistics will be an important piece to work out, but it is very doable. I'm thinking about an addition that was done by our firm at Cala Elementary School in Tuckahoe. The site there has an amount of free space that's equivalent to this room, and it was done on that site. We can find a way to do it safely so the school can operate. But I think during the period of construction, it's undoubtedly going to impact the use of the site by the community.
Do you think it would take out complete use of all the outdoor space, or would there be a small space, or would you anticipate any amount of outdoor space still being available?
Well, I think down to the left, the existing playground and outdoor classroom would certainly remain. It's a question of how much of the rest.
And in terms of construction timeline, again, I'm asking you to answer a question without having a solid plan. But in general terms, are we, when doing, and in your experience working in other districts with projects of a similar type to this one, are we looking for timeline-wise construction, start to finish? Are we looking at 12 months? Are we looking at 18 months? Like, what is your best estimate, guess, not knowing you don't have a crystal ball, magic 8 ball, like this is not a solid answer. We're not gonna, hang you on this, but like what, just to give us a sense of time.
You're right. 12 to 18 months.
Okay.
It depends, on how much renovation you end up doing. But the typical approach is to build new, move into part of it, renovate the existing, and then expand and fully occupy. But it's depending on which addition and how much renovation and how much air conditioning. But, we're not trying to be dismissive of it, but we will help you put together a really reasonable logistic plan before you vote that says all those things. But we need you to focus now on what are we doing. And then it'll be done safely. The kids will love it. Trish can attest to that. The more construction that they can see from a classroom, the happier they are. And parents and staff don't like it as much.
Well, and in general, building new takes less time than renovating old.
Depends on what you're renovating.
True.
So I would say renovations typically happen more quickly. We're talking about new additions here that will have reinforced concrete foundations, steel superstructure. There's a lot of steps. So, and there's varying economies of scale. I would focus on the dollars and the concept and assume the logistics are going to be neutral at this point, because I don't see a huge difference in the sort of logistics or scheduling or phasing.
Between options B and C, you mean? Okay.
Yeah, renovating an existing building in its entirety is equally disruptive to having an addition built next to it. So they both have unique challenges associated with it. We've done both types of projects. We've done a lot of versions where there's an addition. As Russ said, you move into it, then you renovate the old building, then you move back into everything. So I think your order of magnitude is about right. It's going to take at least 2 summer seasons to build the building, which is going to put us into that 14 to 18 to 20 month range, depending on the size of the addition. And then the renovation is really going to be a matter of how can we do musical chairs and how much work can be done over the summers.
Thank you. I mean, I know those were hard questions to answer, and for me, I was asking because I wanted to just sort of try to understand the impact to the usability of the space for the community, and just kind of like try to put that into context around
If
the
we were working
decisions.
through a logistics plan, as Russ said, that's a little bit down the road, right? I think the bigger challenge in this version is you actually have to take away part of the building to build the new addition. And that means you're going to be in a net reduction of space for some period of time. And that's probably the biggest challenge in this version, is to figure out how to manage that removal of that right wing before you can occupy the new addition. That's logistically probably the hardest part.
But that doesn't exist for option B.
Correct.
Right. You're maintaining that wing in option B.
Yeah, in option B, we're just adding.
Right.
So we don't have a net reduction at any point.
I mean, you know, thinking about that, you know, with option C, if that wing's got to go down, that's your gymnasium where you do physical education, any kind of large group gathering, concerts, and lunch. So lunch would have to be moved to probably into classrooms for the construction period, which is doable. People do it. Is it ideal? No. Is it doable? Absolutely. Physical education certainly would be outside anytime the weather's permitting. And then we would have to come up with a physical education plan that made use of other space in the building, or maybe we pair up with, you know, Walken High School, other green open park space, or, open with other green open space that's available. You know, again, weather permitting, we'd have to find other park space or other open space that we could use. Be it maybe you know, across Siwanoy Place. There's other. I don't know the name of it. There's other, we haven't thought through any of the details of these things yet, but of the properties we own, we have those as options for relocation, the same way we did with Hutchinson. And then we could certainly work with the villages to see if there's any additional space that we could make use of for physical education.
Yeah, it doesn't mean it's not doable.
And
It's
recess
definitely
time.
doable. It just,
Yeah.
that's probably logistically the primary difference between the two.
Yeah.
Okay. So then thinking about disruption to learning or disruption to the daily flow, option B would be less disruptive than option C's.
I would say so. I think to Russ's point, the site work is going to be disruptive regardless.
Right.
But, yeah, I mean, I would think if, for us, having to manage a loss of a portion of the building during the school year, that's probably the best piece to lose if you have to, because something like, eating in classrooms and going to other locations is viable versus if you were to lose a classroom, wing of classrooms. That would be really difficult to reconfigure. But yes, you'd be actually losing a portion of the building for a period of time with nowhere else internally to put those students, except relocating those activities. So yes.
Thank you.
Is that good?
So what do we have for the high school now?
All right.
Okay, we have a lot for the high school. So I don't think we've talked about a site plan at the high school, but what we can see here is Pelham Memorial High School on the bottom left portion of the plan, the middle school in the top center, and then this blue span between the two is the proposed footprint of new addition. And you'll notice it's a little bit longer to the north now. There's an option to extend it along the middle school gym. That would include the PE space. So we have quite a few options to talk about here. They're really just kind of subsets, but the primary differentiator is that we've explored options to go from anywhere between 6 labs and 12 new labs. So, and there are a few variants in between all of those, but those are the primary differentiators between all of the options. How many labs are we going to put in the addition? So last time we were here, we talked about option A and B, which was like a 2.5-story building, which was like 2 stories and then half of a third floor, and then a 3-story building addition, and that was getting us between 8 and 6 labs, new added to the building, and there was some net discussion about how to deal with the district office. So there's a complete spectrum in here in the amount of space, and that was really grown out of a discussion we had with some of the folks at the high school about the science needs and what would be ideal in terms of co-locating the programs. So I'll warn you, there's a pretty dramatic difference in price that is accompanying kind of doubling the program of the addition. But what we know we need is a net gain of 2 science labs in the high school with an ideal net gain of 4. So we do think that there's a way to make the 6 lab addition work by moving 2 undersized science spaces into the addition. That gives you a net gain of 4, and you recapture 2 classrooms within the building, and then the idealized version of 12. And then there are 2 subsets, C1 and D1, where we can talk about this dance studio or flat floor addition on the lower level outside the middle school gym with a STEM space above that. So that's the variance on the C and C1 and D1.
Well,
I would
I'm
just say-
sorry if I missed it. What's the current number of science labs?
It's a good
How many do we
question.
have today?
I think that there are 10
Okay,
labs,
Uh-huh.
but maybe 12 science rooms in total.
okay.
And I would say some of the challenge we have with science is we have 3 science classrooms that are not in the annex. They're actually they're in the high school, but they're basically regular classrooms. They weren't necessarily designed to be science rooms. So there's 3 rooms. The shape is not right. It's not ideal. The science room, they were not designed as science rooms. So the ideal would be to get those out of regular classrooms and into science-designed classrooms. So that's 3 there. And then we talked some as well about there's some probably inefficient use of space currently in the design of the older science rooms in the existing lab. Plus, depending on how we deal with the district office space, that could potentially displace a technology lab. So I think that's what 12 was the ideal. I think that would get all of the physics rooms out of the high school into the high school science. It would basically be a high school science wing. You'd have all of your sciences in there, and I believe that was even getting the technology lab. I can't remember if it was there or over in the annex. We had covered a lot of ground in that
There's a
meeting.
lot of ground that was covered
Yeah.
here, and as
Yeah,
Dr.
and I was
Chen-
going to say too, the option D1 that we'll talk about, that came out of really just kind of again, feedback coming back following administrative conversations, in trying to fit in 12 science labs that expanded some of the space of this expansion that we're talking about. So it was one thought to kind of smooth out the overall look and make use of some space that could benefit programmatically. You keep saying, flat floor space, that could be a dance studio, Pilates, something like that. Somebody suggested to me a wrestling room. Could be many different things, but it could be something to expand athletic space. But again, it adds to the cost, and we recognize that.
Yeah, I think as Superintendent mentioned, another factor here is the district administration space. And in the previous concepts, we explored the idea of renovating a portion of the annex into district office space. In one of the concepts, we looked at the 3rd floor, which is currently science lab. So that actually has a pretty big impact on what we need to do with the addition. So if we can make some decisions about what to do with the district office space, it'll drive the need for how many science labs we have in the addition. So we're going to show you a couple options on how to handle district office space, but at the end of this, we really need to focus on getting a net gain of 2 to 4 labs. That's really the mandate for the science department to have the adequate amount of space to function. I think when we talk about a 10 or 12 lab addition, that's really an idealized version of what was requested. So it's probably a little bit more of fleshing out the concept to see if it works. But let's go through it quickly. There's a lot of plans here. I'm just going to caveat. We're going to move pretty quickly. The first 2 you saw last time, so A and B. So this is a 3-story addition. There's a space on the lower level, which we know would be student commons. And then the 2nd floor has 4 science labs, 2 classrooms, and the 3rd floor has 4 science rooms, 2 classrooms. This option includes some renovation of the annex, which I would just ask you to put to the side for a second. We're going to talk about district office towards the end of this high school discussion. Option B is a very similar approach with a high school student commons on the 1st floor, 4 labs on the second floor, and 2 labs on the third floor. So we reserve a roof space that could be expanded in the future to add 2 more labs. So it's a 6-lab addition. And again, just suspend any renovation of the annex for a minute. So option C is a slightly larger addition. This is 10 labs. So we have a student commons on the first floor, which in this configuration has a co-lab adjacent to it. So this is more of an academic slanted space, somewhere between a cafeteria, somewhere between a library, with potential functional use throughout the day, with a snack bar. The second floor has 5 labs, and the third floor has 5 labs. So that's a net gain of, or a net addition of 10 labs. We would obviously vacate the undersized labs in the building. So a net gain of, let's say, 10. And then this option includes the subset for physical education and the STEM lab. So you see the addition has grown up the page, and that's along the outside of the middle school gym on the first and second floor. So it doesn't come up to the height of the library. We'd still have the view out. On the lowest level there would be a dance studio with a little storage space. Second floor would be a STEM, like an engineering lab, and a general classroom, which could support engineering and science. And then our larger lab addition in the middle. So this would meet the request of the science department to have all of the science co-located in the same area, kind of as a hub of the science department. There are 2 versions of what we can talk about for district administration within the high school, middle school configuration. The first one is renovation of the middle school technology space on the first floor. So that's that little purple zone we see in the middle school behind the main office. That could be converted to district office, but it's not large enough to get everybody out of Sanborn. It's less than half the size of Sanborn. So that would require some additional space outside of the middle school or high school to house the balance of people that are in Sanborn. The other option is to renovate the annex. So we could renovate either the second or third floor. There's a lot of debate internally, I think, within the high school as to what floor is more appropriate. And the correct floor, or choosing a floor, would impact how many labs we need to build. If it's built on the third floor, that displaces 6 labs, which adds to what we need to do in the addition. If it were built on the second floor, it displaces general purpose classrooms, which we're getting a net gain by building science labs in the addition. So what we do with district administration actually has a pretty big impact on how big of an addition we need for the science department.
And Walter, how big is the square footage of that annex district office space compared to what our current?
Yeah, great question. So I think Sanborn is about 5,200 square feet, 5,300, somewhere in that range of kind of net usable space. Each floor of the annex is somewhere around 10,000 square feet. So it's a little bit bigger. There's an opportunity to create some other space, which could be professional development, meeting, faculty sports space. There might be other options within that footprint. It's certainly large enough to accommodate district office plus a little bit of extra space. There was a lot of discussion about how the district office would interact with the middle school and high school program. And I think some of the folks in those buildings felt that any pass-through by students would not be ideal. Might be disruptive to what's going on with the admin team, but also might disrupt student activities equally. So there's a little bit to figure out if that's a viable option to use the annex space from district off program size, space accommodations, but also the school operation.
Yep. And the other thing I would add, I know that both middle school and high school, even with the add of science labs, especially if we're talking along the scale of 2 to 4, doesn't fully resolve the room utilization issues of the building. That would address science, but it would not add significantly to the flow. So that was another piece of what we talked about. If there were other solutions for district office, and if the annex could remain classroom space, that would be a meaningful add to really meaningful add to the building utilization. So
It's
that's
important.
about-
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm not sure exactly how to phrase this question, because I know it's not just a question of like square feet. and utilization is important to this, but is there a way to quantify, and I don't expect that you have this number handy, but like to quantify what some of these approaches might mean in terms of class size impacts? If you add 6 new classrooms net, what does that mean for ability to offer, like, what that does to class sizes?
Yeah, I don't,
On some-
I don't have a number to put to
Yeah.
that, but I guess it depends on, it depends, because it
Right.
certainly would ease, it would make master scheduling easier, which would enable us to put classes where they're more accessible to students. In order to, if you've got more classrooms and you want to reduce your class sizes, you need more teachers to
Totally
be in the
get it.
classrooms,
Yep.
which then increases your room utilization.
Yep.
So yeah, it's a couple things that are going to interact in there, but certainly having more space would, especially for science, and this was part of our conversation too, when your rooms are used every period, you don't have the appropriate time to prep your labs and to set up. So this, by having more of them, it would give you better time for the teachers to prepare lessons, which is going to in turn impact students positively, because you're actually gaining back instruction time in some cases. In addition to those 4 rooms that we currently have that are regular rooms, I forgot to mention, I believe we also have at least 1 teacher who's having to travel room to room, which again chips away at that lab prep time. So I think definitely there's gains for science. I think having more space is step one, then it would be having more staffing in order to offer more classes if you wanted to reduce class size.
Right.
But it does have that other
Right.
utilization impact.
Right.
Good answer.
When we first discussed the addition, we also discussed other things, and maybe they're further down the renderings, like safety, changing kind of the entrance for visitors or others into the high school.
Yeah, so we did propose early on an addition to, outside the annex where the loading dock currently resides, to create a new entrance. And that could serve 2 purposes. One was to provide a secure entrance into the high school, but also manage visitors to the district office space. One of the points of feedback we did hear is that the loading dock is of critical importance to the high school. So that was not desirable to do in that location. So we don't include a new main entrance to the high school in any of the options other than what we presented at the loading dock, but we could certainly revisit that issue.
I know we had some conversation at a certain point about, we don't want the architecture of the front of the building, the iconic, not something that is easily addressed to create double security. But we did at some point talk about more of a change in practice, that there could be potentially a vestibule added to the 18 Franklin Place entrance. And then once, like we do at Prospect Hill, for those of you who know Prospect Hill, we still use the old entrance for the morning. Once we bring the students in, it goes to everything, visitors, everyone in and out for the remainder of the day goes through the security vestibule. So we could consider an option like that at the 18 Franklin entrance that would improve security. I think the challenges you have there is just the flow of students in and out throughout the day. Because if you're going to do that, then you're going to force all students to go in and out that entrance, which maybe that's fine, and maybe that's worth it. We're also, not to bring up a potential bone of contention, but we're also likely, still figuring out how we're going to manage the cell phone situation. And the more you funnel students in and out of one location, if you decide to use any kind of pouch approach, not that should stop something like this, but it's something I think we have to also be thinking about, is one single point of entry as opposed to the 2 that we currently have, is it doable? So just they're logistics, and they could all be worked through. But I would say we can look at if we want to look at a security entrance. I think that maybe, as you said, the loading dock we saw as really problematic from an operations perspective. So maybe we think a little bit more about the Franklin Place entrance.
Yeah, I would like to see that just while we're doing all of this, to really look at how we can improve the security would be, I think it'd just be worth seeing what all the options are from that angle. Yeah.
Sure. And I think that there's a lot of options here on the amount of labs, but one of the things to really focus, I think, on is how do we handle district office? Because in terms of net instructional gain, that can have a very significant impact on the total instructional space in the building, whether it's on the third floor and takes over 6 science lab spaces, or is on the second floor and takes over 8 classroom spaces. Those are big net impacts that really kind of drive whether you're in a 6 lab addition or a 12 lab addition. If we don't do any major reconfiguration of the annex and we use it as it's currently used, and you do a 6 lab addition, you will satisfy your capacity issue that in general that we're looking at coming down the line, and will satisfy the science lab requirement as well. It gets complicated once we renovate the annex. So I think having some decision or direction about how we manage district administration will really help guide us and quantify which approach on this addition makes the most sense in terms of instructional capacity. We could use that input and then give you narrow in an option that quantitatively satisfies the capacity concern.
I guess my initial reaction on that is as much as, yeah, sorry, I thought it was, yep, no, no worries. I guess my initial reaction is as much as I think it would be a positive to have the district offices move back in, that space is at a premium, and I think using it for classroom space one way or another is the right thing to do. Now, if that means, maybe that means the technology lab, you know, becomes a district office for some portion of it, like something smaller like that, but the annex itself feels like it's just too much prime real estate to use for district offices.
And I second Sid. I'm a big proponent of savings, whatever we can, and bringing back, stop renting and bringing back, you know, the people in Sandburg back to something that we own. However, if it comes to choosing you guys here or choosing students and having them have more space, sorry, the students will win every time.
With you 100%.
So, totally support Sid. Like, it's about the students and how do we best provide for their education? And if that means having more science lab, which is what we need, then it's having more science labs.
Yeah, yeah. So I mentioned before that, you know, as you can imagine, those numbers, when we start talking about doubling the science labs, we're about talking about doubling the costs, and you're in the range of 30 to 60 million, depending on the amount of science lab we're putting in, and then, of course, whether or not we expand the program into this PE space with a STEM lab. So the variation for the PE STEM lab basically adds a little bit over $8 million to the cost of those variants of C and D. But in terms of the additional cost required to add those labs versus the cost of renovating the annex, you're going to, if you renovate the annex to be district office, it might be a $4.5 million component of the project, but it forces you into adding a much more instructional space, which comes at a premium as a new addition. So I think there's an economic weighing here and benefit to keeping the annex as instructional space, so you're not in a position where your addition starts to grow, you know, significantly. I think the idea here is what we're seeing in terms of the analysis of the concepts is stay with a smaller addition, which satisfies your capacity at the building, and don't do the district office renovation of the annex, which negatively impacts your capacity, your functional capacity of the building. So those two seem to be kind of aligning as we look at the options.
So I'd love the opportunity to take a look at both B and C with the administrative team again.
Yeah.
And get eyes on that, because those seem to me, those appeal to me as ones that that seem like a better fit for the needs. I wonder about, is there a potential then, say if we're not going to renovate the annex into district offices, could we get information about maybe renovation of the annex? Because I know some of our science labs, although they may have adequate space, but the configuration is not ideal for current instructional practices.
Yeah.
I'm wondering too if that could be another way to still upgrade the science spaces if they're not all new, but a refresh that would better support instructional practices and keep the expansion size down a little bit.
Yeah, and we have some worries too when we start talking about these bigger additions that we're reaching the outer realm of what would be justifiable in terms of aid, building aid. So we kind of are outpacing the capacity needs when we talk about a $60 million addition. So is it fair to say we should narrow in on B and C going forward and spend a little time with the high school team, refine those costs, look at security options at the existing main entrance, and look at renovating the existing labs in the annex and probably repurposing a couple classrooms that the labs may vacate, science department may vacate, and they become general classrooms.
Sorry, just, can you, like, between A and C, you're talking about the same, roughly the same size addition, but
Yeah,
whether it's allocated as
slightly different
classrooms versus labs?
configurations. One is 8 labs with 4 classrooms, one is 10 labs. So a slightly different configuration. And, so they're generally fairly close in total square footage.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
I have a question. And I apologize, I know I came in late, so
Welcome.
thank you. I know we're talking about the high school. Can we go back to just some of the pictures?
Sure.
So,
Any,
let's say the middle school extra, the cafeteria, is that gone from this? Or is that,
It's becoming a high school commons.
okay, that's what I missed.
yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah.
And what's going on then with cafeteria space? Or are we back to the shared cafeteria? Or is high school
No.
commons now the,
High school commons, it would serve multiple purposes. It would
Okay.
be high school, it could be
Hanging out.
cafeteria, hanging out.
gotcha?
Teachers can bring a class down, a flexible collaborative space for student work.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, kind of a multi-purpose.
Would there be a kitchen there as well, or no,
We
there's
talked
still?
about like a pantry or a snack bar.
Grab and
something
go,
of that
snack
nature.
bar, I think more of a collegiate style atmosphere. where you
Gotcha,
can-
yeah,
It's
yeah.
not as serious as the library, you don't have to be quiet.
Yeah.
You can get some food, you can study, you can work, you can
I
relax.
gotcha, okay.
It can be programmed throughout the day and throughout the evening with any event you could really imagine.
I gotcha,
right?
okay,
Yeah.
okay. And then back to the previous library had all the different options, with the extra labs, et cetera. And I think I walked in as we were talking about these options. So now I understand the high school commons part.
Yes.
The labs, these are in addition to what we have, labs? Or, and I'm sorry if I'm going to
Yeah,
make you
no,
repeat
it's-
something.
No, it's a great question. It really is dependent on what we do with the annex. So,
the annex, okay.
Yeah, if we renovate the annex and we take over lab space.
Right.
For district administration, these are replacing those labs with
Gotcha.
a net gain. We're looking for at least a net gain of 2 to 4 labs for the buildings in its entirety.
Right,
So
Okay.
it depends on the scenario, but the renovation of the third floor of the annex to district office comes at a premium
Yeah, 'cause you're
of
taking
building new
away.
labs. It's a
Right.
significant premium.
okay, I gotcha.
Sorry, there's a lot of options. It's confusing. But we wanted to explore everything we heard in terms of the desire to co-locate all of the science programs in one wing, explore, a potential location for PE expansion, whether it's
Right.
done now or as part of a future consideration, phase 2A of expansion, and then various configurations for the district office and net gains for science labs. So options B and C, put in a bracket and refine. Does that sound?
That sound good?
Yeah.
And a security vestibule too. We'll
Yes,
slide
we'll
that
add
in.
those to both
Yep.
those options.
Great.
And we'll need some input on district office because that has a big impact on net gain.
Yeah,
Sounds like we have some consensus around that.
yes.
There,
Is that-
there was one rendering that had some district office space by the
Yes.
middle school?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
And I know you said it was nowhere, it's not going to fit everybody from
It's less than
Sanborn,
half of
but
the space that's at Sanborn right now.
it's less than half.
Yeah, it's about 2,000 square feet in that room, in the technology room.
Right, and
And
Sanborn's like
Sanborn is
5,400.
somewhere around 5,500
Yeah,
square feet.
okay.
There are already 2 offices in there,
Right,
so it would be the conversion of the rest of the room So,
Gotcha.
yeah, we would have to look at some other off-site or other spaces within the building. But,
Yeah.
I think you really, to Natalie and Sid's point, I think the better investment, I think
Yeah,
it's becoming clear.
I
is-
agree.
Is keep the annex as student space and maybe use the tech room for a portion, and then we'll figure out a solution for the remainder.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I do agree with both of them about
Yep.
choosing the students.
It's quite all right. I would choose them over me, too.
Okay, that was a lot. We got through it. There are a lot of plan options. I appreciate the input and the patience on that. But I think we've explored what we need to explore in large concept at the high school. So lots and lots and lots of numbers, different configurations. So we've color coded this a little bit because we made some important distinctions here. So across the top in the gray is all the infrastructure, or most of the infrastructure, I should say. We've pulled the high school windows down, kind of the third line up here, 5.75 million, because we wanted to talk about different scenarios to stage infrastructure. And we've put together a bunch of different ways to think about this project. The first scenario is really just do all the infrastructure, stop. Second scenario is do the infrastructure, all the infrastructure at the elementary schools, air conditioning elementary schools, but don't do the high school windows just yet. Wait on the high school windows. We do think executing the window replacements with air conditioning at the elementary schools makes a lot of sense. We know we have some sealant failure there. Introducing air conditioning could create some environmental issues if we don't tighten up the windows. Scenario 3 is do that where air conditioning elementary schools, hold off on the high school windows, and do the improvement option B at Siwanoy. And that's a total of about $92 million. And then we continue on. Option 4 is that same program, but add in option B at the high school. And that takes us to about $127 million. We're proposing, you could think about holding off on the high school windows replacements to when you want to do the air conditioning there. There may be a rehab program that we could do on the windows to make some upgrades to them, but kind of keep them in place. But we thought it'd be helpful to at least stack some of these things together. You'll see all the way to the right, basically all of the costs compiled together, assuming Siwanoy option B and high school option B. And then at the bottom right, we've got the $12 million geothermal cost, and below the line, under the grand total, a potential ITC credit of $9.5 million. So that's a rough order of magnitude estimate. So that's a federal tax credit associated with the investment in geothermal. And that credit is applicable to all of the systems that are tied to the geothermal. So what we've done is lumped in the air conditioning and the heating with the geothermal, and taken a rough estimate, a conservative look on what we think we could get back. It doesn't quite cover the cost of the wells, but gets pretty close if we can take credit on other systems associated with the geothermal. So I know that's a lot of numbers, there's a lot of different ways to look at it, but we thought compiling it in a couple of variants would be helpful, just to wrap your head around the order of magnitude.
Thank you for doing that. I have a question as it relates to the infrastructure and really trying to pull apart the most urgent or the must-haves, like, as it relates to the infrastructure, the roofing, the masonry, the heating. Like, is there anything that you're like, well, end of life is more like 6 years for half of the masonry? Like, I'm trying to understand too. Like, is it all urgent and in the next 3 years, or are there some things that we can at least just as we're determining the all or nothing scenario to understand?
So if you remember the building condition survey, your buildings are generally, well maintained, they're in good shape. But we did whittle down, I think, a number of $90 million of identified work to this $56 million that would fit in this funding window you have, right? Because this is a project we understand will take you into the next decade, and these are things that need to be addressed in that period of time. So can you not do it? Of course you cannot do it. Will it negatively impact your buildings? Most likely.
Got it. So
Yeah.
this infrastructure are all the things that need to be addressed now. I mean, not now, today, meaning like now in this discussion.
The heating plants are definitely urgent. We had some dramatic photos of those. That work needs to get done. Without a heating plant, your buildings will be closed in the winter, or you'll have to get temporary boilers, and temporary boilers are everybody's least favorite project. So not recommend deferring that. And these other components are really building envelopes, keeping the water out. We want to keep the water out. It's that simple.
So two thoughts I had. I appreciate you kind of explaining that, or aligning the windows with the air conditioning, because I think there's a logic there that makes sense. If you're going to postpone one, you can postpone the other because they're kind of paired in their purpose and efficiency. And this is maybe pushing on the same kind of question that Dara asked, if the board were to say, look, we want to cap infrastructure at $40 million, go. Like, how would you think about that? How would you approach that?
We'd cap it at 40 million. You decide. I mean,
What
the
would you
building
adjust?
conditions survey is supposed to be done every 5 years, and you'd see what shape you're in 5 years. But right now, you had no priority one infrastructure. You had nothing in imminent failure. It was all in good shape. But it is near the end of its expected useful life. And things like masonry, $1.86 million now can be $4 million later because it's leaking.
Right.
So it can accelerate. I agree that the biggest issue is the heating and roofing, but these are not replacing ceilings and lightings or replace classrooms. This is all basic building envelope and essential systems for heat. So, but we can back into a number, and we'll work with your facility staff to identify what's the most neediest. But I think that we weren't expecting to come with this amount of information, and I counted it's 10 options now that you saw tonight.
That's the Pelham way.
That's after we put 4 aside.
Yeah, so we're really up to somewhere around 14 or 15 options. So it's really time to start whittling down. And we didn't expect you to make a decision tonight, but I think you've got a lot in front of you and a lot happening, and you need to think about the number and the concept at this point. Right.
I have a question about the, I understand also pairing the windows with the air conditioning. If you can go back to the previous one. So in pushing off, let's say in putting the high school windows and air conditioning in scenario 6 and prioritizing the elementary schools, scenario 2, 3, et cetera. What was the thought process, that it's not as hot in the high school, or is it just coming up with different
They're
financial
older and can
scenarios?
handle it
Yeah,
better.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
I was going to say, I'll share a little bit of feedback
Yeah.
we got, and certainly Walter and Russ can as well. Two things. We have, and John Condon and Jim they've mapped out on the high school. There are a lot of spaces that are
cool.
independently, have air
Okay.
conditionings. Not all.
Yeah.
And that's something, we're working on for the fall, for the top floors. There's more, there are some spaces of air conditioning at the high school, is one thought.
Okay.
The other thought, and no one wants to think about these things, but we, especially with what happened at the middle school, you think about what happens when you get into system failure. And,
Right.
And in this case, it's what happens if the rooms get too hot. We would then have to send students home.
Right.
There is a thought that came up in one of our committee meetings that older students are more able to handle remote learning than elementary students.
Don't say remote learning.
I know. I don't want any of it.
Right, I know.
I don't want any student to have to do that.
Right.
Which is why I think, the refining that's happened
Yeah.
here is really, I think, is genuine and getting us to a real understanding of where we are. There's a little bit of that
Yeah,
logic in
versus
there as well,
elementary.
potentially.
Right.
But I think the biggest reason is not most, but a lot of the upper floor is already covered. So if you're going to have to postpone something,
Yeah.
And can we just touch base on why the urgency with AC this year versus in other years? I mean, it's been hot, it's
Yeah.
getting hotter, but there is an
Yeah.
urgency due to new,
Yeah,
Yeah.
the
Law
government
that-
has
law.
the
Yeah.
new regulation that requires us to, we can't put students into instructional space that's 88 degrees or higher as of September. So this will not get in place by September,
Right.
obviously, which is why we're taking some interim measures. But the reality is that that's the future. So
Yeah.
we need to really, ideally, comprehensively deal with the climate conditions for
Yeah.
our students and staff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, can you, I know we had this conversation before when we were talking about air conditioning and the Siwanoid numbers, but I'm not quite following, if you look at scenario 2 and scenario 3, why the air conditioning number isn't changing if the Siwanoid addition is being added on now? Shouldn't some of that be?
Yeah, I was thinking about that after you said it, and
Okay.
in between slides. I think what we did was we took the infrastructure overlap and baked that into the net cost for each addition option.
Mhm.
If that makes sense. We did not do it with the air conditioning option.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
So there may be
so
some
there may be
potential-
some savings
yeah,
there?
yeah,
Okay, that's,
Yeah.
okay, that's helpful.
Yeah, once a set of options and infrastructure, you'll get a new estimate.
Yeah, I get it.
I have a question about the windows.
I'm
Oh,
sorry.
sorry.
I'm so sorry to interrupt.
Sorry.
Before we leave that, so in just looking at this case in particular, Siway option B, that's not going to impact the air conditioning costs, period, because we still have all of the existing building to air condition. If we were talking about
Oh, that's
Siway
right.
option C,
That's right.
it would be
Right.
a little different.
Okay.
Yeah. But I still don't think we netted the air conditioning costs in those options because we didn't present it separately.
Option C is still more expensive, so it didn't net out like we did initially.
I'm sorry, there's a lot of numbers. and
No,
it's-
I get it, I get it.
Catherine, you had a question?
Yeah, the windows. So I know that you had shown us, I think it was Prospect, a photo that you had taken of the windows that were all foggy. And I imagine that Prospect isn't the only school dealing with this issue. They were like, they,
The condensation.
yeah, the condensation that formed on the inside. So aside from the sort of more obvious reasons to replace the windows with the, new technology, they're failing, current windows are failing, they're hard to open and close, and they're not going to be as insulated, right? So we're losing heat, and that's going to cost us more money and be less efficient. Are there any related safety issues for the windows as leaving them as is, or deferring that project?
Well, difficulty in operating can be a safety issue because they're very large windows, and if this sash comes down, it can be hazardous. And certain portion of your windows are used as emergency rescue windows, so those need to be functional. But the biggest issue is sort of a visual and thermal comfort for the windows, which you already mentioned. But we're not expecting you to pick one of these tonight. But there is something that you do need to get started tonight, which was referenced earlier, which was the SECRA work, which is State Environmental Quality Review Act. I think Cheryl said it pretty clearly at the beginning. As a Board of Education, you're going to be the lead agency in that process. And what you're obligated to do is study the maximum environmental impact that you might eventually fund. It doesn't mean you will eventually fund it. But because there's steps that require take a step, wait 30 days, take a step, wait 45 days. So we have these, and then we have things to prepare in between. You need to get started with that process to give yourself the option of putting something before the voters several months from now. So that's it on the secret process. And
Just on the secret process, we are going to prepare an environmental assessment form, which outlines the scope of work, identifies any potential environmental impacts, and then that information, along with the description of the scope of work, some of the drawings, will be circulated to all interested and involved agencies. So involved agencies are agencies that would provide a permit of some sort to you, so obviously SED, other environmental agencies, and then interested agencies might be other regional or local agencies that may want to act as the lead agency or have input into the evaluation process. So that'll be circulated. There will be a response window of the 30 days. We'll collect any responses if they come in. Absent any responses, the board can make a determination about the potential impact.
No, just
And-
oh, sorry, go ahead.
For now, for purposes of the maximum size? Is that based on cost, square footage?
Yeah, so cost really isn't a factor, it's the, it's the square footage. So we're looking at the maximum sizes for both Simonoy and the high school to be considered. Honestly, they're relatively similar in terms of the potential concerns. But if we circulate something that's smaller or study something that's smaller than what you ultimately want to do, that process of environmental review would have to be redone. So we'd rather err on casting a larger net and then whittle it down.
Totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would add, I think geothermal is also part of that because that's more ground disturbance. And I do raise it because the largest scope of Siwanoy would be option C. Even if that, as you said, even if that's not what we ultimately decide upon, for the purpose of this process, we have to consider that. So again, I don't want people to think that is a foregone conclusion, but it is, again, just kind of planning for the biggest to give us the most flexibility and keep us on timeline. I did want to raise one other thing too, and I know that we've, as we get kind of down to this point where we need to really hone in on decisions to get more accurate costs so that we can get into, tax impact and those kinds of things. We've had some initial conversation about cost verification, and I wanted to, certainly pose that to the board as well, to see if there's interest in us bringing on someone to do some cross-check, because we're starting to get down to brass tacks here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the KGD guys have done a great job, and I trust them to do the right thing, but I also think it's always good to have another set of eyes on that.
We would welcome that. We don't want to be on an island.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think we need to do that.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, we did that through the last bond process as well, and I think found it to be valuable. One thing, I generally, it's someone who's a construction management, functions in that role. What I would recommend, though, is that once we get through, hopefully to a successful vote, that we then go out to RFP for construction management services separate from this process. I think that we kind of did it a little different process, but the net result was the same last time, that it's important, I think, to get someone right at that phase of construction.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's where really the rubber's going to meet the road as far as the costs and honing it in on there. Will that change our timeline to do this early on? I think, was that mentioned that
I
it
think,
will? Or-
I think, we've been having some conversations. I think we have the ability to get someone on board quickly if we're only talking about engaging them for the bond feasibility
Okay.
period. And that's why I think if we're looking for someone to engage through the entire process from now going farther, it'd be
Got it.
much longer, much
Okay.
bigger process. It'd be RFP process and interviews, et cetera.
Yeah, and the bidding process will be another pressure tester as far as the costs and
Exactly.
everything
And
goes,
that's,
so,
as
okay.
they think of that timeline, that's further down the road, for sure.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So I do just want to highlight that next
Yes.
week we have some information sessions, right?
Thank you, yes. Yes, we got upcoming information sessions, and Walter will be there with us to answer questions. So tonight is not a Q&A, it certainly is for the board, but next week is a big week. So Monday, we will be here down in Cafeteria C with a info session starting at 7 o'clock. We'll go through some similar information here and present folks with the items that are being under consideration. Certainly invite any board members, as many board members as are available. Those are great listening sessions to hear from folks. And then on Wednesday night, we have a virtual option. We know that's become very accessible to a lot of parents since the pandemic. So again, we'll be running through the same kind of presentation. Walter will be available on that as well as myself. We will set up some kind of protocol for Q&A there as well. And then Thursday night, we'll be back at Siwanoy, 7 o'clock. All of these are 7. And at Siwanoy, we're planning to do a building walkthrough at 6:30. So anyone who wants to come and see firsthand some of the spaces that we've been talking about, come at 6:30. Mr. Johnson will be there. He and I will, and his head custodian, I think, will be there as well. We'll walk through so you can kind of put eyes on some of the things that we're talking about and have the firsthand experience. I think it's really important for community members who maybe haven't been in the building for a long time or maybe have never been in Siwanoy. We saw that with Hutchinson. Folks had came in that had just never been there before. So we invite everyone to come in and do that. So this will be our first round. There will be more. I know last time we talked about putting some more walkthroughs on. So Alex and I didn't get to the calendar, but we'll get some more dates on the calendar to do that. And one of the things I would say too, we did a fair amount of engagement last time around at this stage, much more of that engagement came after the decisions were made by the board. So I think that's, a lot of folks are kind of blending the two, the pre-decision and the post-decision timeframe. The bulk of it came afterwards, but we're really happy, and again, to see, some folks continuing to be engaged is what we've been looking for. So thank you, thanks for the folks for coming out tonight and for enduring to hear our presentation.
Hey, Dr. Cham, can I just quickly ask something, which is, you and I participated in a Siwanoi
Yes.
discussion a few nights ago that was a very kind of vibrant and valuable discussion, and we heard a lot of important opinions. And one of the opinions, or one of the groups of stakeholders that I think is interesting to hear their perspective is, well, in that instance, was Fareed Johnson, the principal. He spoke about some of the options through the lens of what it's like to actually work in the building. And just as one, as we survey as many opinions as we can, I think it would be helpful for folks to perhaps hear some of those opinions of the district employees who work there, just because I found them interesting.
Yep. No, that's great. Yeah, Mr. Johnson was there and contributed some to the conversation. So I know when Dr. Fitzgerald was a partner in all of this, she was at a lot of those events too. So hearing from the people who live and breathe and boots on the ground in the building makes a big difference. Okay. All right, well, thank you, gentlemen. One more question. Catherine, our questioner.
I do just want to go back. I know you had said right now our job is to focus on the numbers. And I certainly that is prioritizing that, making sure that we understand the numbers. But I also want to just kind of bring back up the understanding of the timing and impact of these options, especially for the Siwanoi community, and even thinking about any renovation that happens or to the middle school and the high school. I mean, if we're going to be asking our community to come along this journey with us, understanding that timeline and sort of how that is going to impact them, so that it might not be a decision maker or the deciding factor of what option we're going to pick, but understanding that expectation so you can settle into that and just know what you're getting yourself into when you're thinking about these certain options, I think is an important element of the decision-making process, certainly as it relates to the impact to learning or to, just the community as a whole. So if that's something that you could add, I know we asked for the impervious to pervious, calculations, but
No problem.
just that general sense, what we just did, like 12 to 18 months for this option, 24 months for this option, understanding that it's a guesstimate, general guess of estimate.
Yeah, we can pencil through a preliminary plan of, I think option C is really the one that is of the most concern, but we can compare, what we think a construction schedule will look like for B versus C, and where we think the pain points might be, broad brush, conceptual level.
Right.
And I think it is a part of the decision-making process. Russ and I have a partner who renovated his house. He lived in a tent in his yard for 6 months. There's certain thresholds of, disturbance that some people find acceptable, some people don't. So why don't we map it out and we can get some feedback on it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think for the middle school, high school, we talked about Siwanoi, but it's pretty neutral there. You're going to build an addition. You're going to lose a certain portion of this field for the addition and for construction phasing, but we can pencil out a little logistics plan. But again, I don't think it's really a factor in which way to go. It's going to be about the same.
Right. No, that's not, it probably won't move the needle on what we pick, but it's just knowing that if we pick with this and it's sort of understanding the full context of what we're going to be settling into.
And I think the
picking.
community, for me, it too was a little eye-opening, this might not even start for 2 or, over 2 years to be
Yeah.
able to sort of just broad strokes, what we are talking about. It feels like it's happening tomorrow. Do you know, like the way that we're talking about it? I think
Right,
it's
like
just
if we-
helpful to kind of really put it into those high level of like, these are the milestones, and this is
Yeah.
when, like this is actually, we're gonna break ground around.
And I'd
I
say the other-
agree. It's almost feels like we'll vote in May, and then September, everything starts, and it's
Yeah. No.
certainly not at all how it
Yeah.
works, so I think it's a good point.
Yeah.
But there will be lots of exciting
Following
things
summer.
happening in September around
Yes.
design and visualization of what these
Right.
projects could be. But we can pencil through a logistics plan and talk about broad brush, what we could expect for construction duration, when could that start and when would it finish,
Right.
roughly.
Yeah, and I'd say the other piece too, Jim's got a little bit of information to share after we finish with this part of the discussion, but we're also going to want to be thoughtful about staging it in alignment with the financing.
Right.
So I think they
Correct.
can give us the nuts and bolts, like, to set the expectation of what, what life might be like.
Right.
And what time frame. But then in addition to that, there will also be some adjustments as we really finalize how to pair those two. So, more
I'm
to
thinking
come.
that phasing and schedule might be a good task for a construction manager.
Yes, it would. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really
Thank you.
Thank you.
appreciating
Thank
being
you.
here tonight. Great. Yeah, no, I think we did.
Yeah. Well,
Oh, yeah, that's right.
or should we do Jim?
Jim, do you want just a quick update on the financing piece? Because
The financing piece
Before we do
kind of
some public
blends in,
comment.
so before we do public comment, I thank you for holding on. I know it's going long now.
Good evening.
Yes.
We're trying.
And again, I think last time we were here, we talked a little bit about the financing, and some of it's kind of chicken and the egg. What are we starting with, and what are we looking at right now? But we did go back to Capital Markets Advisor, our financial advisor, to kind of give us some input on what, kind of like on options B and C, say for Siwanoy, what we could expect for debt service. Again, I used the estimates from the prior meeting, so again, they've changed a little bit here, but say on a $28.5 million borrow for a Siwanoy project, they're forecasting about a $1.8 million debt service on that over a 20-year period, since it's an addition. And of course, there's a portion of renovation involved with that as well. So we made some estimates right now. Say that's option C. We know that the portion of the building is still going to remain the existing portion, so estimating 10% of those dollars are going to be spent on renovation and the remainder for addition. I don't know if those to be the actual numbers. Again, we have to start somewhere, and that's kind of where we plant our flag on something like that. As we look at a renovation or the infrastructure project, say a $55 million on a 15-year borrow, we could expect debt service in the $2.4 million range. So again, that's the assumptions that we have are kind of based on where CMA is seeing the market now. I mean, there's some qualifiers that we have here, right? I mean, it assumes that 95% of the project's eligible for aid. The rates right now are the kind of what the AAA rates are, plus 75 basis points. So nobody knows what the future rates will be. Last time we did this, we were fortunate, and we found them to be lower than where we were at this point in time, but they can be higher. We know if we were that good at picking that, we'd be on an island with an umbrella in our beverage. But again, those are kind of the forecasting that we have here. And when you look at the additions, there's also something called a maximum cost allowance based on business aid units. So there can be some variability on state aid, but there's always a portion of state aid. So as this refines, CMA will then be able to go back and give us better refined estimates. And with that, and with the construction manager and the architect, try to work out a plan that tries to work that into the retirement of our debt, so that the taxpayers don't feel that incremental impact, or how it falls off at kind of keyholes. And then if there's an incremental impact, that would be there. But anything else would, that first 55 to 65 is hopefully debt neutral or impact neutral at that point in time. So we're going to keep working on it. Again, the numbers change, and that's normal. And we expect the same thing. Go through the iterations. Our financial advisor has done this before. They know what's happening. They've worked with our architect. They've worked with us. So we'll keep moving forward. If the board has questions about other items and you'd like to see different things, please let us know, and we'll get answers for you on that too. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Jim. All right, so now community and comments from the public. Please come up. And again, thank you for staying with us.
Yes, certainly. Give me one second.
Hi, Rob Condon, 501 Manor Lane. I feel like I kind of represent I'm a member of the Siwanoy community and more immediately the Siwanoy neighborhood. I was at Thursday's meeting at Siwanoy and have watched the prior board presentations. I don't believe that the revised plans reflect the community's, certainly not the neighborhood's desires for what happens with Siwanoy. We're talking about a 2-acre site here, to use Sid's comment about a soccer field that's very, just a little bit bigger than a soccer field for the entire Siwanoy campus. You look at option C, you're talking about a massive building that's out of scope for the plot that we're on, that takes away what is really valuable outdoor space and what is a really valuable architectural cornerstone to that neighborhood. The architects talked about the architects that designed the Siwanoy building, right? So they were disciples of McKim, Mead, and White, who designed Penn Station. We all know what happened when, the historic preservation movement that came out of the destruction of Penn Station. So, you guys have a lot of good ideas here, and I'm concerned about Siwanoy. You have a lot of good ideas here for the bond itself, right? There's infrastructure that needs to be updated. I think the plan for the high school is fantastic. I encourage you to think smaller with respect to Siwanoy. We recognize the need for ADA accessibility. The Siwanoy site is very small. It is a community jewel. And you're going to destroy that, and I think you are going to find a lot of resistance. I would encourage you to look at the Siwanoy neighborhood and the folks that live there, and their importance to the community. You have leaders in real estate. You have the chair of the Pelham Preservation Society. You have, folks that are really adept at advertising and marketing. I think if you guys think as big as you're thinking right now, you're gonna get a lot of pushback. So I encourage you to think a little bit smaller, be respectful of the community, respectful of the neighborhood. I don't want to see us get down to the point where we've got signs up that say "Save Siwanoy" all around the neighborhood, all around the village. But I think if you're not respectful of that, it will get there, and you'll lose your bond. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for a speedy meeting tonight. Start with a joke. Adam Milkowitz, 498 Manor Lane. I am the homeowner next to the school, the Gray House, you may know. I wanted to start off with just a jog down memory lane. You're talking about Hutchinson bond and how you're sticking to the process similar to what you were doing for that process, you're doing this one. We voted on that bond May 2018. September 12th, 2017, regular meeting, decision analysis for infrastructure needs. September 28th, 2017, tour of Hutchinson School and community meeting. October 4th, tour of Hutchinson School and community meeting. October 10th, Hutchinson options and decision analysis. October 17th, Hutchinson options and decision analysis. November 6th, Board of Education Town Hall meeting at Pelham High School and proposed 2018 bond. I don't know if you're getting the gist of things, but you're months behind schedule. You are not where you were in the Hutchinson process. Not only that, it's apples and oranges. The community has been aware of Hutchinson's problems for years before 2017 came around. Scaffolding, building falling apart. The debate wasn't, do we need a new school? The debate was, how big is the new school? And you gave the community more than 9 months' notice. You selected these guys, I think, in May or August of the year before, just to give you a sense of timing. So you're not giving the community time. You have not reached out to the rest of the community, let alone you've reached out to Siwanoy once after you came out with these first plans. So I just want you to know that you're not on schedule for the Hutchinson process. The second thing is A for effort. Some of the things that you heard from us in my letter were incorporated in the revised B&C. But you weren't there last Thursday, unfortunately, and you did not get to hear the feedback that the community gave, which is C is untenable. There can be no driveway at all in the back of Siwanoy. For you to be in the position where you're making drawings of what a plan could look like without understanding that half of the school walks right down that road, it means your plans are bad. I mean, they're just not cognizant of how the site is used. And you're talking about green space. Green space isn't grass and trees alone. B and C both take the outdoor space of our community and cuts it in half. I mean, permeable versus unpermeable, go crazy, but you take the outdoor space that kids have to play in and cut it in half. My visualization. Basketball courts on top of other things that you want kids to play kickball. I encourage you, come to my house. Come visit me. I work from home 4 days a week. Come visit me during lunch, about 11:30, 12 o'clock. Come watch 3 grades out there using 3 separate areas to play. 2 kickball games are going on while basketball games are going on. Why don't you wait a few months, come in the summer, and watch the high school kids playing basketball while the kids are playing on the playground, while someone else is playing a game of kickball. You will take away that by choosing either B or C. Because we don't need a third playground. We don't need a third play space. We need the play space we have. And I think to address something very specific, you talk about we can come up with options for outdoor physical education space. Julianne's is a great spot, really close to Hutch. You don't have that here. We don't have anything nearby. The closest basketball court to Siwanoy is Prospect. We have basketball games there 5 days a week. As the guy who lives next to the school, I would love nothing more from those basketball games to end well before sundown, and I would be on your side for that, but that's where the kids go. And if you have our outdoor space, destroys the sense of the way community uses it. So I think if you just take a step back for a second, this process feels rushed from a community's perspective because you're giving us 2 months between January 8th and when you're going to vote to put a bond to us. And the scope and the changes to Siwanoy will change that fabric of that community dramatically and permanently. And we all want air conditioning. We all want improved experience in the school. But we also have a community. And I don't think that the architects have had the ability to benefit from understanding how that community operates, the flow of the place around that school, the grade of the site. Stormwater is an issue because of how the site is graded. Are you proposing on digging down 20 feet and putting the new place at a new level? Like, all those things are important. And it's not just, we think we might spend around $30 million, we'll fill in the last details later. You're gonna get a no. You're gonna get a no from the Siwanoy community because we need to know more. So I would really urge you to take a step back and decide, do we need to do this in 2 months? Or do we really need to take a step back and have some listening sessions before we come up with a new drawing? You don't need the final answer, but I think you need a better answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Ilkowitz, if I could just add one piece, one difference I want to highlight, and I appreciate you looking up the history. The facts are the facts. Certainly not going to dispute that. One difference between the projects is we were considering a new building, which adds a longer timeline to the SECRA process in particular, and all the other processes around it. So that's why we had to push a lot earlier in the fall to get a decision related to the building, to that school, which is different here because we're talking about extension. So I just wanted to let you know there was a piece of that difference.
There are separate differences, I'm sure, and I appreciate that perspective. I would also say you are now dealing with a site that borders the community.
Vastly
You
different.
are dealing
Yep.
with a site that needs to be maintained. You're dealing with a building that needs to be maintained. You're dealing with, talking about tearing down wings that are 5 years older than the building. They're functionally the building. Yeah, this is not apples to apples. But to do something that was very monumental, you took a long time. You took a process that the community was bought into. That's not what's happening here. You've started, but I don't know that you'll be able to get it done in 2 months. So really just think about that. And that invitation was true. You have my email address. I emailed all of you. Come visit me. We can sit in my backyard and watch the kids. Not creepily, just as people observing, but I do that a lot. Maybe throw a ball back or two. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move on to financial reports. We have a motion to approve and adopt the updated 2024-2025 Board of Education meeting dates. I think we had some updates to that from last meeting. So, do we have a motion?
So
So
moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so passes. So then we have our motion to approve the bond scope discussion. So we have to,
Yeah, I'd say let's not call it the bond scope
Okay.
discussion.
The
It's a secret resolution.
a secret resolution. So, gonna read all of it?
I want you to take a motion.
You have to take a motion to approve or to put it on the table?
Motion, we have to take a motion for the item, and then maybe we can read through it, and we don't have to read through it. but we can.
Okay. Can we
So
get a
moved.
motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so any opposed, any abstentions?
Do it, and let's
Uh, so-
let's read through it and
Passes,
then
yes.
vote.
Okay. So whereas the Board of Education of Pelham Union Free School District, the board, us, is considering undertaking a capital improvement project consisting of building condition survey, prioritize infrastructure repairs, replacements, and upgrades at Sawanoy Elementary School, Prospect Hill Elementary School, Colonial Elementary School, and Pelham Memorial High School Middle School, including roofing replacements and rehabilitation, window replacements and rehabilitation, masonry, restoration and rehabilitation, heating plant and distribution upgrades. Two-story addition up to 60,000 gross square feet and up to 3 stories above grade plane for cafeteria and science labs, renovation of the annex, renovation of existing space to student commons and district office, new secure main entry, and landscaping and plantings at Pelham Memorial High School, Middle School. Alterations for ADA accessibility, remove new wings, new addition, up to 45,000 gross square feet and up to 3 stories above grade for classroom, cafeteria, gym, renovation of existing buildings, storm drainage systems, management practice improvements, landscaping and plantings at Sawanoy Elementary School. Renovation of existing building at Prospect Hill Elementary School and Colonial Elementary School. Air conditioning of existing spaces at Sawanoy Elementary School, Prospect Hill Elementary School, Colonial Elementary School, and Pelham Memorial School, Middle School. The installation of a ground source heat pump system, including geothermal, well field at Sawanoy Elementary School, Prospect Hill Elementary School, and Pelham Memorial High School, Middle School. Site improvements at Sawanoy Elementary School, Prospect Hill Elementary School, Colonial Elementary School, and Pelham Memorial High School and Middle School, and other associated and high-priority infrastructure improvements at Sawanoy Elementary School, Prospect Hill Elementary School, Colonial Elementary School, and Pelham Memorial High School and Middle School. Collectively refers to the project or proposed action, and whereas the scope of the proposed action is still being considered by the board and may be reduced during the period of the State Environmental Quality Review Act, SECRA. And whereas each school involved in the proposed action, other than Colonial Elementary School, is eligible for listing in the National or State Historic Register, and therefore, if the entire capital project being considered will exceed 25% of a Type 8 threshold, means physical alteration of 2.5 acres of land disturbance, more than 25 square feet of gross floor area of new building, or more than 12,500 square feet of gross floor area of additions or expansions of existing building. The proposed action will be classified under SECRA as Type 1 pursuant to 6 New York CRR 617.4, B, and 9, and whereas SECRA requires a coordinated review of Type 1 actions, and now therefore best resolved that the board whereas hereby classifies the entire project being considered as a Type 1 action, declares its intent to act as lead agency for the project and directs its architect, KG&D Architects, to circulate the board's notice to intend to declare lead agency to all known involved agencies with a copy of this resolution, the 4 environmental assessment form, Part 1, and all existing project materials. So having read all that, this is, just to understand, this is only for us to petition for SECRA to do, to allow us to petition for it. Doesn't mean we're doing all this stuff, because I just read a lot, and it's a lot of projects. So it doesn't mean we're doing all this, it just means we have to request for all of it in order to potentially have the right scope for the project and not have to go back and request additional to the scope. So, just
Right,
want to make
this-
sure everybody understands.
This is what, Dr. Champ, you were talking about.
Yes.
Requesting the maximum. Not that
Correct.
we're doing the maximum, but to have the capacity to make adjustments as needed. So we could request the maximum, but do the minimum, in
If-
theory.
Right, correct.
Right.
So,
Understood.
so now we will take a motion?
I think now
So
we can
moved.
vote. Yep.
I think we just vote. I
Oh.
think we
We
moved
just
the
We
motion.
just vote? Okay, so we have a motion. So, anyone in favor? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstention? I'm looking. Will, okay.
He said
Okay,
aye, yeah.
he said aye, okay. His
Said aye.
voice does come from a different place.
Well, the speaker is pointed
Oh,
towards the door,
okay, so,
so he sounds like he's like in the corner.
all right.
Thank you.
So now we would take, I guess,
Motion to adjourn.
motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Second.
Right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and thank you again for coming in on a Tuesday, after we just saw each other on a Wednesday, and we may be seeing each other sooner
Next
on
week.
Monday again, so thank you.
All right, thank you. And if you would please let Alex and me know if you're coming next week to any events,
Yes.
just so we, I think we crafted certain language around notice.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm gonna
try to
be, we can, because it's public, right?
Yeah, you're not taking any action.
Yeah.
Is that, we don't want it.